So yes, we need to clarify, we need to get these monuments, the monuments in that process defined. But we also need, this isn't requiring the builder to get a survey done by someone else and pay for it. It's to require the builder to allow City of Rollingwood to send ATS to the property while they're doing their other inspections and say, yes, we're re-verifying that it was built according to the permit.
Well, we're only
So
talking
that's
about
what
a pre-permit
it's not a new
survey.
survey being prepared by the builder's surveyor. It is verifying by survey, you're surveying the height.
Yeah, we're not talking about that survey, and that's, I'm gonna call it a height measurement, not a survey, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about
This would do.
we're talking about the pre-permit survey that you're asking what's it called? ATS to do.
This does not, I think other provisions control the pre-surveys. This is a limited provision that is for the height surveys.
I'm all for measuring the height, having them measure the height at framing stage. I'm all for
So
that.
I know
this
where
ordinance
you are
doesn't
and I know where
address
she is.
your concern.
As do I.
Y'all are
Excellent.
talking about two different things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent, lively, gives us what we need to come back next month. Unless I'm misreading the room, I'm not seeing a decision tonight. And so happy to bring you back with a little bit more. I think we'll bring these two back. We have a little bit more information to get from ATS. Yes, ma'am?
I would like to tighten up the motion for
Yes.
what's to be brought back
Great. Go for it.
so that we hopefully can get something passed next time.
'Kay.
What I would propose is that we ask staff to bring back a new section, 10, a new section 110.3.8.1 to the International Building Code and a new section R109.1.5.2 to the International Residence Code that would require that there be a height survey for structures within 5 feet of the maximum height allowed by the zoning district regulations to be performed by the City of Rollingwood or its representative at the following points in the construction process. A, at the time of demolition. B, prior to passing the framing inspection. And C, upon application for an occupancy permit. And that we request ATS to address the C provision and give us their recommendation as to when is an appropriate time to verify the as-built, if needed, in addition to the at-framing survey. That would be my motion.
That is a very specific motion. Okay. You have a,
And I'm,
yes, ma'am?
in discussion of it, if we do
Or-
an A, B, and C, then at next meeting, we can have a vote on the A, B, and C.
That
And
Let me,
after
let me
further clarification from ATS.
let me try to get you a second, and then we'll have a little bit of that discussion, and then we'll go from there. You have a motion, council. Is there a second?
Second.
You have a motion by Ms. Brown, a second by Ms. Hudson. Now, I do have those questions. That is a very specific motion. And on your point that I think you just covered, so are you envisioning that A, B, and C to be sort of three different options, or?
As they're done in the second draft here, we have an A paragraph, a B paragraph, and a C paragraph. Then it would be adding a C paragraph. And so we can address those when we get ready to vote, we can go
Right. Okay, so then
A or B or A, B, and C.
What I think then that
C or
I would
whatever.
anticipate we do is we will bring you back a resolution with everything in the kitchen sink in it. And then we'll let you make some decisions on the items that are within that resolution, and then that's what does that work? I don't know a better.
If it's the A, B, and C as I've outlined, I'm not trying to be
No,
difficult.
I got you,
just
I got
think
you.
that would work.
I'm trying to procedurally, I'm trying to think of how to bring it back to you so that you can make those decisions.
Well, we can, once the ordinance is here, then we can go, I
Strike,
move
so-
adoption of the ordinance, but strike lines
Got it.
110 to 112.
We're on the same page.
Yeah.
Okay.
And-
You have a motion, you have a second. More discussion.
I would just suggest amending it from 2 height surveys to 2 height measurements, because I think I think we can make it, I think survey may be a term of art to an engineering firm, and that we may not be requiring a real survey,
Make
but
it-
instead just a measurement.
Yeah, and I don't know that the motion needs to be amended, but
Okay.
is that amenable to you, Councilwoman?
That would be whatever ATS recommends the term of
Yeah.
art to be.
Sure.
Would be happy for me.
Can we remember to have that discussion with them, change it accordingly in the resolution? Got it. Okay, you have a motion, you have a second. Any more discussion? Hope not. Yes, ma'am.
Really quick. I think the issue is that we need to have universally available monuments and then establish the datum at the beginning of the process. And then once you do that, and you say, here's the datum, and you get 35 feet from this point, or whatever the point is, then it doesn't matter if that's under a swimming pool or under the building or under a whatever, because you know what the height at the top of the building is allowed to be, so you don't have to find that datum anymore. You use your monument and you find that height, and that's how you confirm
I
it.
do think that's correct, and
I took
support-
survey.
Can
I-
you get-
This is my recollection of how
that
that
was
works.
well
So-
said. Do you think we could get ATS to come next time?
My thought would be that we have ATS to come next month and have this,
Explain it to us.
we explain it and have that particular discussion. But I do think there's merit to getting that figured out and then moving it to a point that's,
We do not need to have the datums on every individual property. That's just unworkable.
yeah. Okay, it'll be a great discussion for next month. I think this is gonna be awesome. Can't wait. Okay, you have a motion, you have a second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays, the motion carries. With that, move on to agenda, yes, ma'am?
Mr. Motion?
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
Mayor, I would also make a motion.
Yes, ma'am.
that we ask ATS to bring forward a recommendation as to establishing monuments for our consideration at next council meeting.
All for it. You have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
You have a motion by Ms. Brown, a second by Mr. Glasheen. All in favor say aye.
No.
Oh, wait.
Aye.
So, was that Alec?
Yeah.
Okay, you have a motion by Ms. What is that?
There's something going off this table. There's a short in the table. You want to make me mad? Let's see, make it happen. Right there.
If you want
Oh,
to, if you want
that's-
to take a recess, we can try to tape that up.
Oh, we'll just tell Phil to stop banging on the table. Okay, well, okay, got it.
It's not just banging. It's a short.
All right, we will work on that in a second. Okay, you have a motion by Ms. Brown, a second by Mr. Robinson. Discussion? No. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays, the motion carries. You have 2 motions to, let's remember that for ATS. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda, I'll entertain a motion.
I
Anybody?
move approval of the consent agenda.
You have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
You have a motion by Ms. Brown, a second by Mr. McDuffie. Any discussion? Not hearing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays.
I abstained because I wasn't here at that meeting. so-
You
It'll be a
have
long
we
night,
have
man.
4 ayes, 1 nays. Ms. Hudson abstaining. And with that, we'll move on to the regular agenda. Agenda item number 5, discussion and possible action regarding the right-of-way license agreement between the City of Rollingwood and Google Fiber Texas LLC. Appreciate Mr. McDuffie taking this on and being kind of our liaison on this issue, especially in light of his work on the Utility Commission. So with that, I will recognize Mr. McDuffie, and I assume we have some Google. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Mr. McDuffie.
Yes. So, what we have before us tonight is the possible execution of the right-of-way license agreement with Google Fiber. This does not tie us to any implementation, rollout, permitting. Everything will still need to be done as far as that goes. But reading through the licensing agreement that has been negotiated between the City of Rollingwood and Google Fiber back and forth, seems fairly straightforward. Seems like everybody has good intent. And I am excited by the prospect of Google Fiber providing us with great internet service and creating a network. So, with that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McDuffie. Happy, I think we do have Sasha here, happy to have some back and forth, happy to entertain a motion,
Do we
happy
have
to
a-
have discussion. What-
Do we have a drafted agreement then, and it's been reviewed by council?
It
so
has,
to go?
the agreement that's in the
There it is,
packet.
Right, I remember
Yes.
seeing it now.
The agreement is in the packet, and it has been reviewed extensively by council. Went back and forth on a few minor items, but I think all in all, I've confirmed with our city attorney that does seem to be a standardized agreement. I think we're good.
It's gonna blow. Somebody's sabotaging this.
Westlake Hills. Westlake Hills. Well, I'll say that I got a lot of feedback from I do a monthly council update email. I got a lot of feedback from people in support of Google Fiber, and didn't get any. No one's against Google Fiber that I've talked to. So
Alec, and I'm also happy, again, wait, are we still on?
Not really.
Okay.
just the speakers off.
If you can't hear me on Zoom, raise your hand or let me know. I would say you don't have to do this if you don't want. I'm going to try to kind of ease us into this over time. I'd love to start entertaining motions, and then you can withdraw your motion later. You can vote the motion down or whatever. But if somebody has a motion, happy to entertain it at any point, and then we can have the discussion or not.
I will make a motion. I make a motion of approval of the non-exclusive public right-of-way agreement between Google Fiber Texas LLC and the City of Rollingwood as currently drafted.
You have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
You have a motion by Mr. McDuffie, a second by Mr. Glasheen, and now we'll open it up. You can vote it down, you can withdraw it, you can do whatever, but it'll hopefully keep us moving a little bit. But back to you, council, for discussion on the motion.
Yeah, just one quick question about the gross revenues do not include in section, it's like 512, number 4, bullet 4. What would revenue derive from the provision of broadband internet services to customers where none of the network facilities used to provide such broadband internet services are located in a public right of way? Like, when would that be the case, I guess? What are some examples of that?
All right.
Yeah, that's what I was
I'll
trying to
murder
figure
this
out.
answer, so why don't you
Future-
step up,
future wireless.
identify yourself for the record.
Sasha Petrovic, Google Fiber. That just means that assets in the right of way are not part of the 1% fee. It just comes from the bill.
Okay.
That would be part of the regular taxation of assets in the ground.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Comments?
So I was not here at the last meeting and to have missed any prior discussion on this, but I was curious whether or not the installation would provide any oak wilt trenching benefit.
So I don't believe that we actually discussed it, but I did think it, and that was why I asked how they do it. Some of what they do will be with saw cutting, I think, correct? I don't
didn't
think
know
though,
how- I didn't
it's
know how
not,
deep it
it's
was.
not quite deep enough.
Okay.
It was the answer that
Okay.
he didn't understand why I was asking that last month, but,
It's also very thin.
yeah, it's also not
Half
quite.
About a toy. That's how deep it is and how wide it is.
Oh, look at that.
So there you
Well,
go.
that's not gonna do anything for oak wilt, but
So.
good for you.
Yeah. Came prepared.
you
That
see,
is
that's-
good.
That's how deep it is measuring from where to where.
That's top to
Top
road
of the
base.
street.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
your,
it's like a
your
foot,
streets
like
here
it's
and
a
your
foot
curbs
down.
there. Yeah.
So it's like a
If
foot.
we wanted you to go deeper, could you?
We go. It varies depending on the type of cable. So we'll go anywhere from 8 to 16 inches.
What do we know? Oak wilt's 3 feet,
I
right?
thought it's 3 or 4 feet, isn't it?
Yeah. Last I remember, it's something more around 8 to 10 feet deep that you need to go.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that far? Okay.
Probably not gonna convince them to do that
Not
one.
even
No.
close.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Good question.
And then, are we gonna have a stub out at all properties, or is it just?
It's like, again.
Every other house.
Every other house. It's sort of in
On the
between.
property line, a shared.
This is
Okay,
all
so
what's
it's a-
been,
So it's a stub out available to every
Yes.
property?
Correct.
Yeah.
In the right of way.
if.
And it looks like a
if
sprinkler,
that's allowed.
like one of your sprinkler boxes,
Right.
basically that.
And then the homeowner is responsible for paying for the connection from that point to their house if they.
And there's no fee for that.
Okay.
Oh,
You just sign
Is
up.
that a wireless connection, or is it a,
No, it's a fiber optic connection to the house.
so then you have to trench
Correct.
And that's on
through
that.
somebody's yard to get
Correct.
the connection?
Your yard if you want it. If you don't want it, you don't have to get your yard trenched.
Right. I'm just,
Yeah.
all these people that think this is great and we want to have it, want to make sure that they understand all of the,
Yeah.
you know,
They'll have access to it, future homeowners, but they don't have to avail themselves of it.
right,
Yep.
okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
the only other thing I was thinking about was like if a property's being redeveloped, would these, they're sort of off to the side, like it wouldn't get into, could you move them? Like, or will they ever need to be moved, or are they in position in such a way that they're just sort of out of the way? Like, let's say Circle Drive, somebody wanted to put a Circle Drive in their front. Like, would the box get in the way of that, or like?
Rarely, but we could move them if we
Okay.
needed to. But it's in the public right of way, so then usually people work around. Like if it's landscaping, they'll.
And in most instances, it's pretty much on the shared property line, right?
Yeah.
And so, because you're wanting to,
Correct.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Brown.
The only concern, this doesn't have to do with the license agreement, but my only concern is coordination with our water line project, so that City of Rollingwood doesn't incur any additional cost if Google Fiber goes in first, and our water line engineers have to engineer around it to put in the water lines. So that's my only concern, is that we coordinate that and know where the Google Fiber's gonna be if it goes in first, in a way that doesn't increase the cost of our water line project. Then secondly, and this could get in the weeds, but some properties are not gonna have right-of-way inside the curb for the service box. And so, would you be putting that in the street in that instance? Or what would you do if there's not right-of-way in front of the houses for that service box?
To answer your first question on the water project, I've already shared the plans with my engineering group, and they're willing and happy to talk to the contractor. And as long as we can get the trunk lines dedicated to Rollingwood and get the right fiber counts, then we can wait and go after the water project. We can go before the water project, but we would work with them to make sure
Okay.
that we're not overlapping, because we don't want them to hit us, and we
They
don't
don't
want,
wanna hit
yeah,
you.
like, so it's a mutually beneficial, endeavor to say, hey, here's what we're doing, what are you doing, what's the best way to kind of work around it? So that's, I think you would get the best result out of both parties agreeing to what makes sense. And then the answer to your second question is, first default is the right of way. Then we go into a public utility easement if that's there. And if that's not there, we can sometimes run drops that will have maybe 3 houses in one of those boxes, but it'll be a longer run on the private property that would
Okay.
like run inside the
I
curb.
see.
So that rarely happens, to be honest. Like normally we can find space
A
for
spot
it.
for it. Okay, all right, good. Good.
And then I also asked council, I thought I remembered in the agreement, but if you would address moving of the lines or moving of the.
Sure, their use of our right-of-way is subject to our right to use our public right-of-way for a legitimate government purpose, including our water and sewer lines. And so if it's in the way, they have to, at their expense, they have to move their line.
Oh, when I was thinking about this, as I understand it, you'll be going down both sides of the street, 12 inches deep. Sometimes we may not know, after this project, we'll know where all our water lines are. But if it takes additional cost, or if we can't locate the water line, that's something for the engineers to work out, but I think it does need to be coordinated, and it sounds like y'all are happy to do that.
Happy to do it.
Yes.
As long as the urgency was making sure we got the right fiber counts in the ground, just to allocate capacity to Rollingwood.
And those facilities will be along BK's Road?
Yeah, that'll be in and around
Yeah.
kind of the city, so it won't be on the interior yet.
Okay. All right. So I think we've got a lot of right-of-way there. Maybe. Thank you.
Of course.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, any other discussion? All right, you have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Thank you. Thanks for calling. Great. Yeah, welcome. Look forward to working with you, and we'll obviously coordinate and keep us kind of informed on y'all's timeline and that sort of thing. Great, thanks. Okay, with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, discussion and possible action regarding a recommendation on residential speed limits and explanation of radar reports. An agenda item that I put on for your consideration last month, trying to realign some of our, or possibly realign some of our speed limits here in the city, and I think that we're planning to come back and have a little bit more in-depth discussion with PD, and I know that Ashley has been working on getting that lined up, so I'll turn it over to Ashley, and then you tell us who all we have, and I know we've got Chief, but
Yes, I'll just turn it straight over to Chief. Coming out of last month's council meeting, there was a request from PD to kind of just give us an idea of the problem areas, common, issues with speeding, and from y'all's perspective, where are the areas we should be focusing our efforts. So I'll turn it over to Chief.
Right, so our focus is, as far as our speeding concern, is gonna be on your main areas, which are gonna be Rollingwood Drive, Timberline, Riley, and Hatley. Timberline and Hatley, due to the demographic of the roadway and the line of sight, also with the width of the street. And Rollingwood Drive, obviously being a main thoroughfare to and from. And so that's always been a concern. Not only that, but we do have our park zone in place that we do want to tend to as well. And then the other one would be Riley, which is another thoroughfare to get to Stratford. So that has always also been another one of our problem areas. And so what I would like to see is data to kind of support these areas. And I put a call in to K-Freeze to see if we could get maybe an estimate on how much it would be to do an engineering study. I have not heard back from them yet, but I will definitely send that out to you guys. But I know there is also a bill that is pending to see if possibly the municipality does not have to have an engineering study to support a speed limit change. So.
okay. Thank you, Chief. Any questions, Kevin?
I have one quick comment. I just thought everyone should know that the Google Fiber dude was on The Bachelor TV show.
Really?
Like 10 years ago.
Oh, is that who that?
Yeah,
We didn't even know.
I know, he's famous.
You didn't want to embarrass
All right,
him.
council, let's
No, I didn't want to embarrass
stay
him.
on the agenda item.
Did not want to embarrass him, but I thought it was funny. So my quick question is, and thanks for reaching out to engineering firm. I guess we'll hear about that next month. But my question is, I reviewed that data, and it looks to me, looking at the data, that like speed limit sign and the flashing lights doesn't really slow people down.
So, we did run it, unfortunately, when we moved it, it got kind of out of whack, and so we are now collecting data again on that.
Okay.
So we'll pull that data and I'll, like I said, send that out to you guys. When we ran a week, it shows that 85% has an average speed of 29, which is 4 miles over the speed limit. And so what they consider to be a speed issue is 10 miles over the speed limit, is the way they usually interpret that data. I think we are in the early stages of really trying to get a clear understanding and clear view of what our speed data looks like.
Sure.
But so far, and obviously, I mean, so there's different things, and I'm gonna try to see if we can capture data. I know a lot of things is when you do have a flashing sign, it does catch the attention of drivers as well. It causes them to slow down on some aspects. And then we also have if you put the sign in the same location and people get used to it.
Sure.
And, tend to drive better on those, areas. But so we're gonna start really kind of moving this around and kind of compiling data all over the city versus
Okay.
our main areas.
That's great. A question, last month, somebody told us from police department about what level we were writing tickets or pulling people over, and I think was it 8 or, it was like 9 or 10 miles an hour over?
So yeah, usually in the residential, you're running between 5 and 10.
Do we
When you
have a
get
standard that we're using? I thought somebody
No,
mentioned a
it's officer
standard.
discretion. We actually don't establish a standard. But that's usually 5 miles is usually 5 miles and under. You're kind of really,
Oh, sure, yeah.
yeah.
But I was just, if we didn't have a standard and I didn't know how much, I guess my question is more broadly, could we be more aggressive in enforcing our existing traffic laws?
Of course.
And is that something that, I personally have heard from people that that's what they'd like to see us do. And I understand that, when you start ticketing at 6 and 7 miles an hour over, that it makes some people mad, but I don't think it hurts the city of Rollingwood to have a reputation for being real hard on speeders. I think that reputation would be good for us. And also, my question is, wouldn't it generate revenue? I know there's some state law limitations on how much revenue we get to keep, but could it be a cash flow positive thing? And also, I think pulling people over in Rollingwood isn't necessarily a bad thing for traffic stops because, I had my truck broken into and a neighbor's car stolen. And I think if people are cruising through Rollingwood and don't know we're tough on speeders, it's probably a good thing to pull some people over that aren't familiar with the neighborhood.
Right. And I mean, obviously, we don't look at traffic stops to be a revenue generating activity. What we want to do is we want to gain compliance. And so definitely can, advise the officers to make those contacts. It doesn't say that a citation has to be generated. I mean, obviously a warning can also be given,
Sure.
If those thresholds are lower. But we can definitely make those contacts.
Those are my thoughts.
Okay, council, any other questions? Any action to take? I think we continue to have a little bit of homework to do here. Well, and I know that do you want to comment on the legal research that you did on it?
Oh, I didn't, I haven't done much other than what we did at the last meeting.
Okay.
So you can, the pairs that if you have a one-way road that is used for two-way traffic, you can reduce it down to 10 miles an hour without having to have a study. Otherwise, you can take it down to 25 miles an hour without a study. Is
Oh,
mine.
without a study?
Mhm.
Correct.
I thought it was 30.
30 is a prima facie, but you can take it down to 25 without a
Oh.
study. You have to have a finding that the prima facie is unreasonable and dangerous or something like that. But
Correct.
you don't have to have a study to prove it. It's just a finding by the governing body.
And is that what you were proposing, Mr. Mayor, is 25 miles an hour across the board?
That's what I was thinking. I want to make sure that everyone agrees, but that was my thought. And I want it to be easily enforced and easy for the residents to know exactly what's what and where, but that was my thought.
It'd be a lot easier to ticket people doing 35 if it was 25.
Yeah.
Well, or is that not ready for a motion to do the 25? Because, I mean, we don't need an engineering study on it. Is it something you want more study on, more feedback from the department on, or?
I would entertain a motion to take it to 25 as advised by the police department, and then I would probably still bring it back to you to tell you, okay, here's exactly what it is, where it is. So I would be happy to do that for you to.
I'd like to get it out to the public for more input and discussion if we're going to propose it. I'm not against the idea of having a vote on a 25 across the board speed limit, but I'd like to get it out, the suggestion out to the public and get their feedback on it.
I'd like to collect more data before we do anything.
Yeah.
Okay. That too.
So you would want a actual study or just the
No,
type of data
I just
yeah.
want what Crystal's proposing, or,
So why don't you,
getting more data.
if you're so inclined to, why don't you make a motion to bring back sort of a visual depiction of exactly what would change and where, and then we'll bring that back. That'll be in the packet. Everybody can comment or review it, have any comments that they want. We could even do it in a public hearing if we wanted to.
And then I think what we can do too is maybe even move it weekly to these four, especially these four major locations, and pull weekly data just to kind of, see what it does.
Same.
If, that way that'll be readily available for next month. And then also hope to hear back, just in case you do decide to go with an engineering study, on what that cost would look like for the city as well.
Because I don't see us going below 25, so I'm not sure what the point of an engineering study would be.
That's kind of where I am.
Yeah.
I doubt that we would go below
So I don't think
25.
I
you're
agree. I don't think you're gonna go 20 or under.
So I think you're wasting
and-
your time on talking to the engineers about that. But
Yeah.
would you recommend going 25 across the whole city, or are you ready to make a recommendation?
No, the recommendation to go 25, we support. I mean, and
Across-
it's going to be easily to enforce as well. We're not going to have any issues.
Across the board?
Across the board, yeah.
Okay.
And I think like I said, the width of the roadway and the line of sight issues that we have on some of these roads,
Sure.
could support that lowering 100%.
But do we have anywhere at 20 right now?
No,
No.
everything is 30. The only thing you have is 25 in the park zone.
We've got two areas that are 20 right now, Mayor. We've got
Wallace?
Edge Grove.
That's what I thought.
And we've got Ashworth.
Oh, 20, yes, you're right.
So let's not just,
We wouldn't change
we
those.
wouldn't say a blanket to 25.
Okay,
We
right.
would say a lowering of anything that's above 25 to
Right.
25.
Yeah, which are all 30s, right?
Right.
So, okay. I think we should discuss, talk to our constituents about that and might vote on that next meeting, because we don't need engineering for that.
Yeah, and I don't really need a motion, but here's what we'll do. We'll bring back a map, and we'll highlight that map.
Everything on the
And we'll tell you what's 25, what's 20,
Okay.
and that sort of thing. So
Okay,
can we work on
perfect.
that?
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
You can hop right up. Thank you, Chief.
No, of course.
No.
Shanti Jaykumar, 3309 Park Hills Drive. At the last meeting, I suggested that we retain the park speed limit to 25. And at that time, when I made that comment, I was assuming that the rest of it would stay at 30. And my question is, how are other municipalities that border us, like Westlake and parts of city of Austin, what kind of speed limits do they? We are in a Tri-City and we walk the Tri-City route every morning, and also and there's part of it is county, and so there are all kinds of speed limits, and we try to make people slow down as we walk sometimes in the morning on Rollingwood Drive. We do our own policing, but seriously speaking, I just would like us to be in sync with other municipalities. If it's 30 in other municipalities, I suggest we keep it at 30, the park zone at 25, and whatever those two exceptions at 20. As it is, we have so much confusion. We're driving on Bee Cave Road. It has so many segments of speed limits. People have enough to do with that and not have to come home and then go 20 on Edge Grove and then 25 for the park, and then, it's just very confusing.
I think it would be less confusing if it was all 25.
Oh, I get that. I get that. What I'm trying to ask is, what are other municipalities doing that border our municipal, territory? Because on Ridgewood, half the houses are Rollingwood and half are Westlake, okay? Westlake takes care of the roadway. We don't. From the curb, they take care of it. Same thing with Rollingwood Drive. Part of Rollingwood Drive is Rollingwood, and the other half is Westlake. So we are bordered by these cities in such proximity that, do they have 30? Do they have 25? I just want us to clarify these little, could lead to aberrations in speed limits, and then we'll have chaos, I would like to monitor and enforce what we already have to start with, so that everybody follows the regulations. We want to have a lot of kids in the neighborhood, want them to be safe. So it's all about safety. It's not about how fast you can get from point A to point B. But let's have a regular thing. So if y'all
We'll do.
would
We will
address
have
that, I appreciate it.
We will have a different highlighter color for those shared
So, what we
shared
can do
jurisdictional
is include in the,
boundaries.
when we include on the map the actual speed limits, do you want it to include Westlake? I mean, as far as
Look
like on this side
up
that's
here.
bordering.
So
on
yes, I'll get
like
with
Grady
you.
and,
Yeah,
and,
yes.
Sugar Shack and all that. Okay.
I'm just saying, it's too
Mm-hmm.
many regulatory bodies.
Okay.
What we won't do is one side of the street at one speed limit, and the other side of the street.
Well, luckily, Rollwood Drive, we have
Yeah.
Well,
completely.
we paved Rolling Drive, part of it, and they paved Ridgewood. So
Yeah.
anyway.
So,
Okay,
okay, we'll
great.
definitely do a map to include those.
I think the biggest issue is not whether the speed limit is 25 or 30, but that we are enforcing so that people are not going 45.
Agreed.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Here.
Okay, I think we have no additional action on that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chief. We'll move on to agenda item number 7, discussion of possible action regarding amendment to the Code of Ordinance Section 107.3, definitions related to the definition of building height residential in the R residential zoning district. This is Ms. Brown's agenda item, and I believe Ms. Wayman has additional information, but I'll first recognize Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This agenda item is being brought back, I think, for the third time. We passed over it last month pending, and the prior month pending the formation of the Comprehensive Residential Code Committee. I've left off a C and an R. Close
Try
enough.
to shorten it down a little.
This is one of the items that we began to talk about early in the spring as being a high priority. This is an amendment to the definition of height, building height as it exists in our current residential code. And we're doing this, or the reason to do this in advance of any change in what our current standard is so that we can enforce our current standards more closely. We have a problem with the definition in our code because it uses a defined term that's not in the substantive provision of the code. And there's also two concerns with respect to the definition that would be addressed in this limited ordinance amendment. One would be currently if you the height requirement depends upon the slope of the lot, if that slope is greater than, nothing, the slope of the lot between the perimeter of the building plus 5 feet around it, if that slope is less than 10 feet, you get to add the actual footage to your 35-foot maximum height. If it's 10 foot, if it's just under 10 foot, then you get to add the 10 feet. We can find no other code that does it the way we do it, in allowing this extra 5 feet around the perimeter of the building to define what kind of height limit you can have within the perimeter, the building, perimeter of the building itself. And it creates some anomalies and some opportunities for gaming, so to speak. Take, for example, a lot that has a hump in one corner of the lot. Well, if you can move your building close enough to that hump, but your lot is otherwise flat, you can have a 45, and that hump is 10 feet, you can have a 45-foot building. If you're on a lot that's flat as the first lot, but doesn't have a hump, then your building can only be 35. So there's some, and it goes the other way too. If the lot slopes away from your building at one side and you structure it that way, then you can have a 45-foot wall on the low side. So it's a difficulty. There's no really, there's no structural reason to have that additional perimeter. And so the recommendation would be to require that the change in slope be measured at the perimeter of the building, as opposed to any 2 points within 5 feet of the perimeter of the building, as it's currently written. The second change this would do is to say that to clarify that the original native ground surface is the existing grade on the lot prior to development. And we've talked about that a little bit earlier this evening. This would require the verification of the grade by survey or by the approved building plans, so that you can't manipulate the surface of the lot prior to measurement. And it ties up these two loose ends to our current definition, pending further work of the CRCRC on building heights. If you look at the ordinance itself, I've identified in the memo I did for last month's meeting, which was included in this packet, we have 3 options. One would be to adopt this amendment as proposed. The second one would be to adopt amendments to give effect only to the survey requirement. The survey requirement being the language that says, that clarifies the term original native ground surface. Or the third option would be to punt this issue to the CRCRC. I would like to get the sense of the council on those options. My recommendation at this point, pending further discussion, would be to adopt the proposal as proposed. If there is concern about adopting the perimeter change, the 5 feet, eliminating the 5 feet around the base of the building, then I would suggest that we go forward with the survey requirement and adopt this definition, because it also, if you look at the ordinance in lines 69 through 72, it closes the gap where our current code has a defined term, building height, comma, residential, that's not used in the substantive provision of the statute. And we need, in that language from 69 to 72, ties those two together. So I do think we need to adopt language that would tie the two together, and I think the survey requirement is not controversial. And as time has gone by, over the last 3 to 4 months, there is, in my sense, from the people I've talked to, good consensus that this perimeter change is needed as well. So that's my discussion of the agenda item, and I would move adoption of ordinance 2023-05-17-07 as proposed.
Second?
So you have a motion by Ms. Brown, and you heard the motion, and you have a second by Ms. Hudson. Okay, council, so just a quick. Sorry, for the record, my mic was not on. Okay, you have a motion by Ms. Brown, you have a second by Ms. Hudson. And this motion is to adopt this new proposal. This proposal, just so everybody is clear, so this proposal was what went to planning and zoning, correct? And planning and zoning moved to not recommend the proposed change to council.
That is correct.
And that then, that motion passed on a 4-2 vote to not recommend. And so what's before council is a motion to override that recommendation by planning and zoning, which, and the reason I'm setting this up is because it requires a 4/5 vote. And so I just want you to be clear of what the vote threshold is to go to override a recommendation to not recommend by planning and zoning. And that's all I have. So you have a motion, you have a second. Is there discussion?
I would like to talk about it, but I don't have to go first. If somebody wants to speak up.
I'll speak up.
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, so one thing just, it strikes me right off the bat is like the survey requirement, which we talked about surveys just a couple of agenda items ago. So that's a little bit confusing to me how this relates to that. And then the other thing is I'm just sort of inclined to want the, to give this to the, CRC and get their feedback on it. But that's sort of where I stand on it right now.
Okay. Well, if it's my turn, I'll go ahead.
Yes, sir, Mr. Glushin.
So I don't have any problem with the proposals in general, and I do think that the Comprehensive Residential Code Review Committee is going to study the issue more carefully and may come up with a different recommendation ultimately, and if they do, I think that that's fine. But even the members on the Code Review Committee that I've talked to support making a temporary addressing height now, because it is really kind of the biggest problem we've got in terms of our immediate concerns from residents about overbuilding. The height is the most pressing one from what I've heard from voters. And so the people on the committee I've talked to, and I haven't talked to all of them, but I've heard from a couple of them that, it's kind of my understanding of their view. And as far as like overruling P&Z, I mean, I did have a good discussion with Tony Stein, and he made a good point that, even if we're going to pass this against, as a contrary to their recommendation, at least it's been vetted, it's gone through the process, there's been public hearings on it, they've discussed it, and so, from a process perspective, it doesn't really give them a lot of heartburn for us to do it, because it's been vetted and it's been discussed and everyone had their say. And if we did something radically different than what's already been through the process, he'd want it to go back through the whole process, and I understand that. My only other point I want to make, and at this point in the discussion, is that looking at this definition, it says that it's going to be let's say it's the elevation of the highest adjoining original native ground surface to the exterior wall of the building. Now, if you have a hipped roof, that doesn't measure to the height of the building. It only measures to the height of the wall. And the roof in the middle of the structure could be much higher than the wall. So this definition doesn't stop anyone from building a 50-foot house. And if you look at the definition that Westlake Hills used in their measurement of height, they say that no principal part of the structure shall exceed the maximum height in the regulations above natural ground grade or original grade directly below. And I think that that's better language, because directly below would mean from even in the middle of the house, directly below, even if that falls in this middle of the house, it's still measuring from original grade, if that makes sense.
Mr. Mayor, may I respond?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
This definition doesn't set the maximum height. This definition sets the point where you measure the slope at ground level of the building to determine whether
Okay.
you add up to 10 feet.
Okay,
So it's not measuring the height to the top of the exterior wall. It's saying when we set what the slope is when we are defining the slope on the lot, we do that at the building wall, not 5 feet from the building wall.
okay, I understand, thank you. Sorry, so I guess you have to read that in context of also the height limitation again, which I'll have to just open up and read.
The other substantive provision is 107-71. It's
Okay,
35 feet.
that's what I'm looking up. Thank
This
you.
is just the definition of,
Okay, I misunderstood that, thank
Yeah.
you.
You too, Debbie.
Okay. Ms. Hudson?
Well, I was gonna say, my understanding was that P and Z was not objecting to the concept of this change. They just wanted to send it to the review committee. And due to the ongoing construction and the length of time it's going to take for the review committee to finish their process and for us to make a change, I think we need to do more than what this proposes. But I think that this is a good interim step to get us closer to where we need to be. And so I think we should, there's no reason why you should be able to go past the house and add higher, 35 feet plus a point that's even farther than the edge of the house. So I think this is a perfectly reasonable first step, and I think we should take that step.
Okay.
And I tend to agree, and I also think that this allows the review committee some degree of breathing room to take whatever time is necessary to do it, to allow adequate feedback from the community, that type of thing. I mean, this is knocking down the most egregious issues, or at least allowing some relief from the most egregious and the things that we've heard from the community that is their largest concern, that is causing the most upset. And once again, it's totally open for review by CRC, and they may come up with an entirely different, better proposal or something like that. But in the meantime, we are stopping the bleeding, to some degree. So I think this is a very modest review, interim step, and I think it's entirely appropriate. I can appreciate P and Z, but I think it's entirely appropriate for council to take this step.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really not changing the height requirement,
No.
or it's not doing away with the 10-foot slope. It's just clarifying by definition where you're gonna measure from, and I think that's a good
eliminates the
change.
game.
Yeah, because there's been some strange things done with foundations. and-
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all your work on this
Yeah.
definition, to you and Ms. Hudson. I know you both put a lot of time and effort into it. And thank
That
you
was-
for doing that.
It was Albrook.
It was all Brooke. Well, then, all the thanks to you, Brooke.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing no further discussion, believe you have, I believe you have a motion and a second in front of you, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays, motion carries. With that, we'll move on to agenda item number 8, discussion and possible action on ordinance amending the city's code of ordinance section 102-2, adoption of codes, amending the building code, local amendments related to wood shingles, and the definition of building height. And I believe this one has been back before us a time or two also, and I'll recognize Ms. Wayman. I think we were basically done with this last time, but I'll recognize you to tell us more about why we're back.
All right, so this also was pushed from the last city council meeting to this meeting. This is a companion piece to follow up the ordinance that was just approved here. We had always had 2 definitions of building height. We'd always had one in our zoning code and one in our building code. I say always, from whenever it was put in. So in the recent history as we've been talking about this. We had kind of always just proceeded down the path that we would need to, if we amended one, the other one should be consistent. After discussions with ATS and our planning contract help, ATS had recommended that we don't need to have a local amendment for this definition. And so what this ordinance does is strike that local amendment. It doesn't make it not in our zoning code. It will stay in our zoning code. It's just being removed from the building code at their recommendation. While we were in there, there is also a prohibition against wood shingles. We are not able to prohibit or regulate building materials per the legislature. And so that was just in there as well. And so that has also been struck from this ordinance.
Great explanation. Caught them speechless.
I move the adoption of ordinance 2023-05-17-08.
You have a motion by Ms. Brown. Is there a second?
Second.
You have a motion by Ms. Brown and a second by Mr. McDuffie. Is there further discussion?
So if we delete this, sorry, but if we delete this, then we don't have a definition of where we are measuring the height to.
It'll be in the zone. It'll be in the other one.
Is it in the other one?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I couldn't hear Charlie, but here's the situation. The building code, neither building code uses that term anymore. Building height, comma, residential. Instead, they use grade plane and building height. And so this would, on all things related to plumbing and electric and materials and construction standards, use the height measurement in the building code that the building code is drafted to use. In other words, we don't have a local amendment to the building height term as used in those codes. So on the zoning side, we have a height amendment, building height definition that ties to our building height substantive regulation. And so the building codes don't regulate maximum height of residential buildings, so there's no need to coordinate between the two. In fact, and I don't know how we do this, one of the curious things in reviewing this proposed ordinance is that the International Residential Code does not apply to any building higher than 3 stories. So we have
So do
some
we have a way
residential
to
buildings.
regulate those buildings?
Well, it depends.
Building
It's
code.
the question, what are you regulating? We can't regulate the standards that are in these building codes for those buildings because those codes regulate those standards. And state law requires we implement those codes. But we can regulate building height, and because we have a building height definition in the zoning code, we can regulate building height there. These codes don't regulate building height. They just say if you're this tall or taller, here's what apply, or you're this short or you're this tall, here's the standards that apply for wiring and plumbing and materials and concrete and all that.
I will trust your judgment that removing this does not eliminate our ability to regulate.
No, it
the
does
height
not.
of the building.
No,
It does not.
it just means we haven't deviated from those codes
Okay.
in instances where we could if we so desired.
Okay.
Okay. I believe we have a pending motion, right? Yes, we do. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. And 5 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Moving on to agenda item number 9, update and discussion on the timing and work on the rehabilitation of fields 3, 4, and 5. I think we have Mr. Glasheen to give us an update on this item.
Yeah, just very briefly, so Phil McDuffie and I have had many meetings out there with different contractors, and things are all lined up. Mr. McDuffie met with the Viking fence guy last week, and I guess I've met briefly too with y'all. It's all coming along and lined up, and we'll bring the specific contractor proposals back here next meeting, and still expecting to do the work as soon as Little League's done this summer, which I think is sometime in June they finish, so we'll probably be doing the work right after our next council meeting. Probably line it up for the end of June, beginning of July, I think, depending on Little League. And we're not, as far as the I-9 sports goes and the lease, we're only talking about kind of a small area around near the gate of fields 3, 4, and 5. Really just the place where there's bare dirt. And
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
I'm sorry, we're not. The fields would not be completely closed. It's just a small area where the gate is now, and where there's bare grass, and there's some grading to be done there to make it drain, and then a little bit of dirt work, and then I think we'll be able to put in sod because it's such a small area. Also, I spoke to the Whittlesey landscape guys again today, who are providing us the composted mulch, and we want to spread, I think it's a 1/2 inch or an inch of that stuff, probably 1/2 inch, I think is what they recommend. But we need to get a spreader to do that, and they don't have one, and I've talked to Izzy, and we don't have one. But what Whittlesey's recommended is that you can get one from a golf course and borrow it. But I thought maybe we could get our maintenance department to contact the City of Austin Maintenance Department and see if they have a spreader that we could spread composted organic mulch. It's top dressing is what they call it, but it's just all organic top dressing. And they'll know what it is. And I figured if our city asked their city to borrow their spreader, that they might let us do it, use it.
I've got some other things to ask them for.
You want some other stuff?
But I'll add that to the list.
We'll get there.
Because they're going to say no to my other request. But how often is that done?
Well, you can do it as often as you want or need to, but I think, it hadn't been done before. We'll still see how it goes. Might do a little bit more next year, but, you don't want to just bury the grass in that stuff. It's just a little bit, but it may be, it depends on the condition of the soil. You see how it looks a year from now, and if it needs any more. But whatever you add, helps. The question is, at some point, it becomes marginally, effective in improving the conditions of the soil.
And you talked to Izzy about it. Did he know, because we rent equipment all the time and have that in our budget to do from time to time.
Yeah.
Did he know is that a rentable item?
It's not really, but every golf course has one.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so the other option was to check with the Lions Club golf course. I think would be reasonable, but I thought of the city of Austin. I thought, yeah, exactly. But I don't know that if the city runs it. I know they own the land, but I don't know that they run. Or actually, UT owns the land, but UT owns the land. But anyway, somebody's got one we can borrow. It's not gonna take us a day to spread that stuff.
Yeah, we're happy to try to facilitate that. What time frame did you say?
Probably like the last week of June or the first week of July.
Okay.
That's when we're talking about doing it.
Will you
Or any time in July, really, but
just make a note? And we'll try to make that happen.
it'd be great. In fact, we may do all of that right after we finish all the other dirt work and remediation and we'll lay the new sod and then put all that stuff on top because it'll help protect the new grass from browning out. It'll keep it, well, it's gonna brown out no matter what if we put it down in July, but it'll keep it alive, help keep it alive.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind, just keep that, you'll have a better sense of that timeline.
I will.
And so just kind of bump us about it
I'll-
2 or 3 weeks out and
I'll
we'll,
check with Ashley and Izzy about it. He's been great to work with on it. We're gonna need him to flag the sprinklers anyway on 3, 4, and 5, and then fix whatever we break while we're doing it. So we've talked to him about it, and he's been great to work with.
okay, perfect. Thank you. Any other updates or questions on item number 9? Not hearing any. We'll move on to agenda item number 10, updating discussion regarding RCDC interest for capital expenditures on park improvements. Recognize again Mr. Glasheen.
So, we made a suggestion to RCDC. Mr. McDuffie and I, again, are both liaisons there, and we discussed, suggestion of parking lot, studying some proposed parking lot and drainage improvements of the park. And, my impression was they're kind of thinking about it. Somebody on RCDC suggested that we consider maybe the idea of funding a sidewalk along Edge Grove down to Bee Caves, which I think is a good suggestion. I think in general we should just have a real open discussion and idea and gather, ideas from the community about what we might use our CDC money for and whether it would meet the standards, which I think a sidewalk down to Bee Caves would meet the state limitations on what we can spend money for. It's an interesting idea. Another idea that's been floated in the past, I know, is doing something with some of that city land down along Bee Caves Road where the creek runs from Edge Grove all the way to the car wash over there, because there's several acres down there. And if it could be improved with a walkway and made pretty, maybe even with some lighting or something, I could see that encouraging some of that retail that is along Bee Caves. It would sort of encourage them to maybe get a restaurant in there because they could open it up to, a prettier, like cleaned up, attractive, park-like area where they could even extend and put tables out there if we let them, as a way of doing economic development to stimulate and encourage restaurants coming in, which, restaurants would generate a lot more sales tax than the existing businesses there, or at least some of the existing businesses. But, there's about 7 or 8 parcels along there that would all benefit from that sort of development. So there's just, generally we're still, they're thinking about ideas. We're throwing around ideas, and, I think it would be useful, and I think it would be useful to, follow up on the suggestion of potential park drainage improvements by getting, and even some parking lot improvements by getting our engineering firm to come out here and look at the park and just do a walkthrough and talk about some things that we might be able to do, and see if they could give a ballpark idea of what it would take to design or build some drainage improvements around there. There's some obvious stuff out there looking at drainage issues that could and should be done. The dugouts hold standing water right now, and in addition to that, around that concessions or bathrooms building, there's a lot of washout. That one of those batting cages was built right in the middle of a drainage channel, and to my view, and I talked to a contractor who looked at it with me, as far as doing drainage repairs, just demoing that thing and rebuilding it on the top of that bare hill there next to it would be, essentially moving it out of the drainage would be probably a smart thing to do. Some of the work we're doing on the fields is it's really mostly drainage is what we're doing. Fixing fields 3, 4, and 5 is fixing the drainage. So those are there. I think we could get some we could spend a little bit of money with our engineer to just give us some suggestions. I know that, I would love to hear from Shanti too and go walk through that parking lot with you and talk to you about that parking area and get your thoughts on it, because I know you have a lot of strong opinions about the parking lot, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it and spend some time where I can walk through it with you whenever it's convenient for you. But I think if we got some kind of proposals for the park from the engineering firm, that would help stimulate public discussion of ideas of using some of that money. And that's something our CDC asked for. They said, if you want, if you want us to approve something, bring us something more specific. Go get an engineering, you guys go ahead and pay for the little bit of engineering up front to bring us something more specific, rather than asking us to fund the engineering to come up with ideas, And I think that's fair. So I think that's something we ought to consider. And it's not on the agenda for tonight, but we could bring it back next week if there's interest on council to, spend a little bit of money on engineering to come up with suggestions on capital improvements for the park. For not, to build grand new things in the park, but to fix drainage and fix the parking lots that we have, which I think would still qualify as capital improvements for the purpose of state law limitations on RCDC money, but still it's not, we're not like building a new pickleball court necessarily, but, taking care of what we have in terms of the trail, drainage, and parking.
Well, and just to add on to that, since the first go around you brought up the trail right there at the end.
Yes.
But you didn't bring it up before, and I think
It's cheap to fix the trail, that's why.
I think the trail integrated in with some of the drainage issues that are more prevalent on sections of the trail. That may be a little bit more expensive, but yeah, I think the trail and fixing some of those drainage issues while we're at the trail would be great with the get engineering to look at that as well. But that's the only thing I have to add. Other than that, Councilman Glasheen did an excellent job of running down what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Sounds good. And I, after mid first week of June, I would like to go do a tour and get you guys to kind of update me on some of that too.
Yeah, we'd enjoy that.
Thank you all for taking lead on it. Any other discussion or update on this agenda item? Okay, with not hearing any, we'll move on to agenda item number 11, discussion and possible action on an ordinance amending the city's code of ordinance related to public hearing notice for zoning, regulatory, and classification changes. I believe Ms. Wayman and Mr. Zeck have worked through this, and I will I'll recognize Ashley to just give us a brief reminder, and then Mr. Zeck to bring it home.
All right, we brought this before City Council last month, and it still had a few things to iron out. The intention of this ordinance is to just lower the mail notice that we currently already provide from 30 days to 20 days. That would allow P&Z from one meeting to the next to be able to advertise for a public hearing. And then it also removes any newspaper notice for the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is not a requirement of state law, but it would still remain for the City Council's public hearing. So that is remaining in our ordinance as well. This ordinance also brings special use permits, which are effectively zoning changes into compliance, or into the same noticing requirements as zoning changes.
And I don't know that I have to add anything after that. That was actually a very good description, but I'm happy to answer some questions. I do know that Councilmember Brown had some questions which I responded to, and so I'm happy to assist with any other concerns that you might have, Councilmember Brown.
All right,
That's
cool. Ms. Brown?
Um, Thank you, Ashley and Council Zach, for getting this in order. It's one of those things that's painful to do,
Yes, it
but
was.
necessary. I have two suggestions on this ordinance. If you look at lines 132 to 131, this paragraph described the content of the notice being given for any kind of special use special use application. It's being taken out of the section it's in. It's stricken from the section it's in because we're moving notice to the next page, 2 pages over actually. But when we moved it, we didn't include this content. And I would like to request that we include the content that's in the lines 123 to 131 in the new notice provision, so that when there's a proposed change in use, this would be, for example, if we wanted to sell beer or wine in the park, you know, a change in use that's not currently permitted. It's kind of like a zoning change. It's kind of like changing a zoning requirement, or if you wanted to put convenience stores in a commercial zone that only was for office, something like that. That would be, or let a bank building sell, add a food truck, or things like that that are one-off zoning changes not permitted within that zone. That's what a special use permit would do. So I think it would be good when we give the notice that it has a brief description of the proposed, this says development, change in use, including nature scope and the address. The notice described the change that's requested. So I would like to, I think these are things that help people understand what the notice is, instead of just saying a special use permit is being requested for 304 Nixon Drive. I would like to include this notice, the content of the notice language in the new notice section. And then if you turn to the new notice section, which is on begins on page 6 and continues on page 7, this notice, we require notice if it's a change in a residential property to anyone within 250 feet. If it's a change in any other zoning classification, commercial, governmental use, or mud,
Or park.
then everyone gets notice. But it treats park as if it's a change in residential, and the notice only goes to 250 feet. So I think what we do, my recommendation would be on line 204 to strike or park district, so that if there's a change in a zoning classification to a zoning district other than residential, it goes to everyone in the city, with the effect that if there's a change in the zoning for park property, notice would go to everyone within the city. So those are, I would recommend approval with those two changes.
Let me do a couple things here. One, okay, give me specifically the recommended changes that you were making with the page and line number, just so we don't have a motion yet, but let's get all the puzzle pieces in front of everyone, and then I'll entertain whatever motions y'all want to do. Okay, so page
4,
Page 4.
line 123 to 131.
Okay, hold on. Thought I was done doing this for the day. Okay, page 4, line 121,
123
123
to 131.
And you're striking?
It is stricken.
It is stricken?
Unstrike.
I would like to
Unstrike.
Yeah.
unstrike and move.
Okay.
And I
it
have,
needs a little
yeah.
editorial
it,
change.
it does. And I, if, do you mind if I?
Hold on.
Not at all.
You too. Okay, we're gonna unstrike
Well,
that.
before we unstrike, I just want to.
I just want to know what she's proposing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then we're
Sorry.
gonna all
My bad.
talk about it.
Unstrike.
Unstrike and move to where?
And move to the appropriate place in paragraph B, beginning at line 192 on page 6. So that it's an appropriate subsection of
Got it.
section B, beginning at line B, page 1, line
Okay.
192.
And then what is your second recommended change?
My second recommendation is on page 7, line 204, strike OR Park District.
204, striking for Park District. Okay, all right, got it. That's number
Yeah.
2.
Yeah.
Opine away.
No, and I'm not going to opine. I have no issues. I have no issues with the changes. First, and I know Councilmember Brown was not at all accusing me of making changes without the approval. So I'm not responding to that. But I just want everybody to know that the reason that that I did strike those is because we also strike number 4, which I thought everybody was in agreement with, and I think we still are, which is the applicant is no longer responsible for drafting these notices. The city is responsible for drafting these notices. And I made an assumption, which is probably a bad idea, but I made an assumption that if the city's drafting the notices, the city would know to put all that stuff in there, so it didn't need to be in the code. But but I have no problem inserting it back into the code. I would just need to know, get some more information to make sure. Do we want this language to be specific to specific use permits only? Or do we want it to be for any zoning classification?
I think for any zoning boundary change or change in classification.
Oh, and I'm happy to do that. I just needed that clarification.
Okay, now with that, I'll entertain whatever motions you guys want to make. Or ladies, you guys and ladies want to make.
I move the adoption of ordinance 2023-05-17-11 as proposed with 2 amendments to unstrike the language appearing on page 4 at line 123 to line 131, and to move that language to paragraph B, notice requirements, that begins on page 4 at line 192. And I'm assuming this would leave it to our legal counsel to draft appropriately as a subsection to paragraph B.
Yes, ma'am. It'd be a subsection 3.
Yes. And then the second change would be to strike the words or Park District on line 204 on page 7.
You have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
You have a motion by Ms. Brown and a second by Ms. Hudson. Is there discussion among council?
I like the change on the Park District because for a variance, we require public notice to all residents for a change in the park zone. So it seems like we should be consistent
Yes.
between both of those requirements.
Okay, good comments. Any other discussion, dialogue? And one clarification, so, very specific, motion and instructions, so that's great. It would not be your intent to need, for that to have to come back, like we just make those changes and it's done, so we don't have to.
That would be
Okay.
my suggestion.
Just wanted to clarify that. Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 12, discussion and possible action to approve the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget calendar. This is our, we're beginning our annual ramp up for our budgeting season. We've started this practice several years ago to try to give council some clarity and give us some budget planning clarity as well, in addition to staff kind of knowing what the timeline is. Obviously, on Wednesday, May 10th, Ms. Wayman distributed the worksheets and our kind of our internal documents to our staff and directors so they could start beginning that preparation work. Tonight is our vote on the proposed budget and tax rate calendar, which is literally what we're looking at here. And then we will begin to meet with staff and so that we can start putting those budget documents together for your review. Probably going to push that a week or two, as Ms. Wayman and I talked about today. But the rest of the agenda is there for your review. We can discuss it. This is, I don't think there's really nothing different from the way we've done it the past several years, correct?
Correct. This is taking last year's budget calendar basically and confirming that the deadlines still meet up and aligning it with this year's dates. The only thing I'll say is there is some chance for things to change depending on the tax rates that are chosen. So there are different requirements for public hearings and notices depending on the tax rate that the council goes with or is considering going with. So this is a little bit subject to change. And usually without fail, something changes between here and probably August when we're really getting our rates together. But for the most part, this should be accurate.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there items that are in this on this calendar where we need a supermajority? Just the dates
There's,
to kind of make sure we can.
I don't believe that, so that's a great question. And you jump in here, but I don't believe that there are any supermajority vote requirements. I think there's at least one that requires four out of 5 attendees. So like a super majority quorum. Thank you.
Okay.
So.
We
And
may want to get Ashley our calendar for the summer.
That's a great point.
yeah, that's a very good point.
Well, there's only 1 or 2 special council meetings on here, so
Yeah, and those.
most of it is
yeah,
just regular council meetings,
and all
right?
of those, that's really where you're doing the final decision making, and anytime you see that too, it's usually around a rate setting, a tax rate setting issue. So it's less about the budget and more about the tax piece.
That's
So
right, yeah.
yeah. I don't think I misstated that.
No.
State doesn't really care how we spend it; they just care how we raise it.
Oh, they kind of care how we spend it.
Well, that's okay. That's a fair point. In recent years, that is true. Okay, and do we need to adopt it? I think we do need to adopt it just so that we're all on the same page. Is it a requirement to adopt it?
I don't know.
It's just good practice. It's the best management practice, and we're going to do it. So,
I move adoption of the proposed budget and tax rate calendar for fiscal year 2023-2024.
you have a motion by Ms. Hudson. Is there a second?
Second.
You have a motion by Ms. Hudson and a second by Mr. McDuffie. Is there discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Okay, with that, we will move on to agenda item number 13, discussion and possible action on a resolution amending the fee schedule regarding general building fees, including plan reviews. This is a staff agenda item brought to you by Ms. Wayman, and I'll recognize Ms. Wayman.
So this was a request to be brought back last month after reviewing our building fees, including our zoning reviews and our drainage reviews, just to make sure that we were capturing everything we needed to be capturing. There was a request last month made to do a full pass-through, so basically just any cost that we incur, we would pass directly on to builders for all the different types of review. What is brought before you today is a bit of a hybrid between that and what we currently do. So currently we have a base fee that you're charged for an application, an area multiplier and then a site plan development permit fee. Usually for the average home that's being built right now for the size, those fees are covering the first 2 rounds of reviews. So those are covering the first 2 rounds of zoning and drainage reviews, as well as the first round of building code reviews. And so what we're proposing here today, if you'll take a look at that ordinance amendment in the appendix, we believe that section A1.003, payment of consultant fees, letter A, already allows us to collect all consultant fees incurred by the city that are associated with those applications. And so we believe we already have the authority to do that with this section. The only amendment we are making is to clarify to the builders what is included in those base fees. And so if you'll look at A2.001, general fees, as opposed to just saying that plan reviews are included in all of these, we have clarified that 1 building plan review and 2 drainage and zoning plan reviews are included. And then all other reviews will be at cost. And so what we'll do is we'll be tracking through the process. Once they hit their second review, we will then start charging them what the engineers are charging us for those reviews, or the planners who are reviewing the zoning plans. We also scratched a section about permit duration just because that is handled somewhere else in our code and this was no longer up to date. So with that, I will take any questions.
So we're passing through all of the consultant fees, but we don't have any additional cost for staff.
We've actually rolled in some of those costs as well.
Okay.
Right. The reason we didn't do a full pass-through is that you wouldn't recover staff costs unless we were to add an administrative percentage. And so with those 2 reviews, it does kind of comfortably allow for those other fees, for the rest of kind of the staff costs to be taken into consideration.
Okay. So it has been accounted for, it's just not a separate,
Right.
separate fee.
And I will say as well, I think we're probably due a building fee study in the near future to confirm that, things are changing in the building landscape. Reviews are getting more thorough, they're more detailed. That's a good thing. But it's probably pretty close to time for us to be reviewing these fees in their entirety. I did these reviews off of residential new construction, so things might be slightly different for additions, other things like that. And so we would like to do that at some point. It would probably either involve a current consultant that we already have or going out for bid for a building fee. And so we would bring that as a separate item at a future meeting to ask whether the council would like to go out for a building fee study. But we think this will stop the bleeding.
Yes. That's what I was going to
Yeah.
say.
Good feeling.
Just a curiosity question here. Number R on this list is a vacation fee of $1,200.
Are under which article?
On the bottom of page 6.
I would assume that has to do with plats. Would that be a vacation of a plat?
It's what I charge to, this is how I,
I'm
This
just
is-
wondering what kind of vacation you can get for $1,200.
this is,
We'll watch your house for you.
this
for
is
a
how I take
small-
the family to,
Staycation.
yeah, I think it is I think is this correct, that it's a vacation of a plat?
Yes, it is
Vacating
a vacation
a-
of a plat.
Okay.
Not to say that we couldn't clarify also some of our fees in this process, so that we would like to do that at some point too.
That might be good.
Okay. Happy to entertain motion.
I move adoption of resolution 2023-05-17-13 as proposed.
We have a motion by Ms. Brown. Is there a second?
Second.
You have a motion by Ms. Brown and a second by Ms. Hudson. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Thank you, council. And thank you, staff, for everyone for putting that together and making sure it was done correctly. With that, we move on to agenda item number 14, discussion and possible action on a release and settlement agreement for the property located at 400 Farley Trail. Believe this was requested to come back in front of council from the last meeting, and now it is here. I think we do have someone here representing the homeowner. If you'll identify, well, first of all, let me lay it out. Does anyone have anything to open up with? Otherwise, I'll recognize. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Brown.
Could we take a 2-minute break?
Yes, we can. We're so close to being done by 10, but we will take a 2-minute recess.
Through this.
See, I don't think I took this, I don't think I don't see an email confirmation.
Okay, the city council, City of Rollingwood is back in regular session from our recess, and back in session at 10 o'clock p.m. With that, we recessed on agenda item number 14, discussion of possible action on a release and settlement agreement for the property located at 400 Farley Trail. And anyone want to open up? Otherwise, I will recognize Mr. Smith. All right, with that, Mr. Smith, happy to, please identify yourself and go
I'm
for it.
David Smith with the Law Office of David P. Smith, PLLC, and I'm here representing Shapiro Homes LLC on this issue. I will say, I will note that I'm glad that I didn't take off my tie before I came today because I was flirting with it. But I figured Gavin would have one on, so I kept mine on. I had some like really nice like talking points that I prepared, and was going to talk about the history and kind of where we've been and why, in my opinion, after some discussions and looking at it from my client's perspective, settlement makes sense to get some certainty in this, and frankly, from the city's perspective, I think it makes some sense too. And by the way, my client wishes he could be here. Sorry he couldn't be here, but he had a previous engagement out of town that he has to attend and be for, and he's away from the internet as well. But in preparing for this, I saw the agenda posted on Friday, looked at the backup materials, saw nothing. On Monday, nothing. Tuesday, nothing. And I was, after preparing my remarks, was getting ready to come over here, checked the packet one more time, and there were 2 new pages in the packet that had not been there before. I'll direct your attention to page 154 and 155. Which were not there Friday, not there Monday, not there Tuesday.
And one second, I'm not sure I have them in my packet either. I think.
It's not the settlement agreement.
Okay, I guess this document was added today, is that right? It was added today. Okay, so that's,
The issue I have is,
I've not seen it either, so.
yeah, the issue I have is, first time I saw it was 5 days ago. I'm not sure if it's the city's position. I'm not sure where it came from, but I will tell you, in a quick review of it.
Well, hold
I
on,
found
let's get to the bottom of
At
that.
least 6 factual
1 second.
errors.
I'd like to get to the bottom of that. So, was that a staff document?
This is not a staff document. No, sir.
Okay, is it a council document?
Mr. Mayor, it's
Yes.
my document.
Oh, okay, it's Miss,
It's a recompilation of materials previously presented and organized a little differently.
okay. Mystery solved is it's Councilwoman Brown's document, it's not a staff document.
Thank you. But it doesn't identify itself. So that's what
Fair
I'm
enough,
identifying.
no, glad we could.
It is also, going through it quickly, I found at least 6 factual errors that are both inflammatory and just flat out false and misleading. It reads like an advocacy piece. It makes incorrect conclusions of fact, statements of fact, and conclusions of law. And I think it really, I mean, and I can get into a lot of them and point it out. I mean, like item number 2, it says in 2019 and 2020 application for variances, the corner lot setbacks are sent to Board of Adjustment. Well, that wasn't happening in 2019, 2020. We know it wasn't happening. It characterizes in part 2, it says on January 5th, 2022, initial plat certified by city and filed but subsequently superseded. That is false. It was not superseded. It was amended in order to fix a minor clerical error. It was not superseded. I mean, it's plain fast and loose with the facts here. And it reads like an advocacy piece. And then, I mean, in the initial plat filing, the 20-foot setback was clearly shown on there. There was a clerical error that was gone back and fixed. And then part 3 goes into the differences between the Rolston and the Farley properties. The third thing, I mean, and I'm just picking out the highlights. The third item says, did not present letters from approving, I guess I meant supporting, but approving his setback request. Rose presents such letters with P&Z requests. That is false. There's at least one neighbor directly next to it who supported it and said, please note this, please accept this note of support of the replat of 500 Folly Trail. I'm sending this as the adjoining property owner, and I feel that the setbacks in the replat are consistent with the pattern of development present in the neighborhood. We did a quick look. There are over a dozen similarly situated lots in this city that have been approved with a 20-foot side setback. One of the other things is it claims in here that my client submitted his plat and building permit after February 16th. That's false. We know the initial plat was confirmed and entered on January 5th. In addition, another error. It states he has not started construction, as if that's an issue, and the lot is for sale. His lot's not for sale. I mean, if you can show me where it's being marketed, if you can show me where it's out there for sale, show it to me. But it's the fact that, you know, I'm in here ready to make a presentation, and then I have to spend my time correcting this last minute entry. And I think this really illustrates, because of all the uncertainty and everything going on here, why my client's amenable to settling this and putting this to rest, and why I think it makes sense for the city to settle this and move on. Because I'm not sure what the end game is here, frankly. I really am not. And, you know, frankly, the uncertainty right now is causing a lot of hardship. I mean, you know, the question was raised, well, he hasn't started construction. Well, it's hard to kind of really feel good about starting construction when there's this sort of Damocles sword, you know, potentially hanging over your neck, or when you feel like, you know, you have, you know, members of the council gunning for you. And it, you know, I think, you know, there's a situation where I think the settlement agreement made a lot of sense in one manner in which it was approved last week. I think it makes a lot of sense here. I think creates certainty for everyone, allows everyone to move forward. I mean, I think there's going to be some fundamental, you know, differences of law maybe. But, you know, I think, you know, the city's going to certainly have, you know, their position. My client's going to certainly have his position. I think, you know, the fact of the matter is my client has a plat that's approved and a building permit. And, you know, I mean, there's a vested property right here. And I think at this point, to try to resolve the clouds of uncertainty, move forward, I think it's a healthy thing for everyone, frankly. But I object, not object, it's too strong. I have issues when it seems like there's a document entered that is very personally directed at my client unnecessarily and full of several falsehoods that are highly biased and inflammatory. I would urge you all, my client, talk to my client a lot, and urged him to, counsel him that it's in his best interest, I think, to enter into a settle agreement with the city if it's offered. I would urge the city to do the same. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And I will say we will try to do a better job in the future of making sure that documents are, if we try to do the one sheet when it comes from staff, but that's not widely known, and so we'll try to do a better job of identifying those documents. Is there other, Ms. Brown?
I'd like to respond. David, here's the for sale listing for 400 Farley Trail. It's being handled. I've asked Ashley to circulate that, and I'm happy to email it to you. But it's being handled by Stacy Shapiro at Moreland.
Yep.
And it's publicly available if you Google 400 Farley Trail.
Correct. I'll take a look at that. Like I said, I saw this last minute, so I'm flying.
Well, one of the council members at last meeting had asked me to set out the details. We had talked about this, and I was asked, and the timeline dates here are from my review of the permit file here at the City of Rollingwood. The applications in the item number 2, I think you mentioned that, that variances for corner lot setbacks have been required in the past. The minutes of those meetings are where that information comes from. The city's record of those Board of Adjustment meetings is where that comes from. I've also, on all of the items showing what the history has been of the 20-foot setback, 1, 2, 3, and 4, these are all, 1 is the code itself, 2, 3, and 4 are from the minutes of meetings of the Board of Adjustment, the P&Z, and our city council. So those can be verified that way. The concern I have in this case is that we have a building permit directed to be signed over the objection of the building official by the mayor. And we've talked about whether that's in regular order or not. But let me, may I finish? And then we have a situation where, as council members, we believed we clarified the policy on corner lot setbacks at the February 16, 2022 council meeting. And then in my review of Mr. Shapiro's building file, yes, he did have a preliminary plat. There was a replat. I don't know if a replat, it's not an amended plat, it's a replat, so you can, I use the phrase supersede, but it's a change from the pre-existing plat. That replat was filed on May 4. This is a matter of record, Travis County District Clerk's Office. The May 5 superseding plat, the building permit was filed on May 4 here at City Hall. The May 5 superseding plat was filed, that's a matter of record in Travis County deed records. You've questioned my integrity, Mr. Smith, so I just want to go through this if I could.
Show me where it says supersede.
Okay, all right, hold on. We're gonna let her, you can stay up there, in case there are
Yes.
questions.
And the zoning reviews are dates that come from the permit file. So what we have is, the council clarified the policy in February. There was a May 5th building permit filed, 3 or 4 months later. There were then, at the very first zoning review, Kay Freeze said, this doesn't meet our code requirements because our code requires a 30-foot setback on the side yards that border a street for a corner lot. So that would tell someone like Mr. Shapiro, and we're all charged with notice of the law and what the building code requires when we filed a building application, that a variance would be needed if he wanted a 20-foot setback rather than the required 30-foot setback. Then we have the paragraph 3 is my position with respect to where Mr. Shapiro's permit differs from Ms. Rollison's. Those are my opinions. And Mr. Shapiro did not seek variance or approval of his plat from the P&Z. Ms. Rollison did. She thought that gave her approval of the setback lines. That was in February. Charlie clarified it a week later at the council meeting because Councilmember Hudson raised it. So that differs from what Mr. Shapiro requested. He didn't go to P&Z and seek approval of the first plat or the replat. He did not seek what Ms. Rollison sought and thought was the required variance. He didn't do that. He just filed a plat. City of Rolling Wood didn't certify it to zoning requirements, it certified it to subdivision requirements, which are that it's got a meets and bounds description and it's got the, public easements shown, dedicates the public easements as required. It doesn't approve the zoning building lines. And that's another thing we clarified at the February council meeting. Mr. Shapiro has not made the argument that his property falls within the exception to the 30-foot requirement by having an adjoining, having a rear lot line that abuts another corner lot, and the two together form a block. Ms. Rollison's property, she made that argument in her argument before the Planning and Zoning Commission. I did not see in the permit file or anywhere else, nor has Mr. We've had this on our agenda since January. Mr. Shapiro has not presented letters from the neighbors. One of those neighbors is the former mayor who has sold his property, and that was the adjacent property. Now they're new neighbors. I did not see that in the permit file, nor has it been presented to us as council members. And as the fourth item there, he submitted his plat and permit application after the February 16 council meeting. He got notice at the very first zoning review that his application did not meet the setback requirements. Ms. Rollison had a different experience. She went to planning and zoning, got a variance she thought she needed, filed her building permit application, did not get told until 4 months later that she needed to get a variance. By the time these matters came to the attention of council, Ms. Rollison had already finished her foundation. Mr. Shapiro has not begun construction on his property. And he's got the lots for sale. That only in the sense that, it may or may not be developed according to the building plan that he has for the property. So Ms. Rollison's situation was very different. And in my mind, I've not heard anything, and I've said this at the very first time I brought it up. If there are considerations that would have resulted in Mr. Shapiro being granted a variance, then let's hear them. I'm not here to do him any harm, but on the basis of what I know at this point in time, there's nothing that would distinguish him if Alec had walked into the planning and had filed a permit on March 1 of 2022 seeking to develop a corner lot with a side setback that was 20 feet along one side and had not presented any grounds for a variance or grounds that would fall within the exception, our building officials would deny that plat, or would deny that permit and tell him he needed a variance. And so I can't distinguish Mr. Shapiro from any other person that would walk into our city hall after February 16 of 2022 with a building permit application. Anyone that walks in here knows that the monkey's on their back to have read the code and know what the requirements are. And so the fact that Mr. Shapiro is out the money that he spent to create his, to file a building permit application, there's no cause or justification why he didn't understand or wasn't advised by his architects and consultants what the requirements were. And then from the city's part, we gave him, the city did everything right. So I just don't find a reason to apply the code differently to Mr. Shapiro at this point. If there are reasons for that to happen, let us know. What are those reasons? We haven't eliminated the 20-foot, the required 30-foot setback for a corner lot. And so you gotta go get a variance. It's just kind of bottom line thing, unless there's something that we don't know about that justifies some exception here. So that's where I am.
And I'd like to speak on this at some point, but I don't need to go next if somebody else wants
I don't know
to.
if y'all want to respond to that.
I would wait.
I agree. I don't think it's worth it.
Let's keep you there for factual questions. I'm sorry, I was not on the
I
record.
want to clarify one thing.
I'll let you clarify. We're not going to get into a big debate.
It's a
I'll let
factual thing.
I'll let you clarify one factual thing, and then I'd like to recognize Mr. Glasheen.
Well, it's, the houses on MLS are being marketed. It's a Layton website.
I'm
Fair-
sorry,
fair.
could you say that again?
I really
It's not
don't.
being marketed, it's not being marketed, it's not on MLS, it's not listed for sale. There's not a sales price attached. It's not being marketed. There's a website. Yeah, and I don't know how that website is being monitored or what.
All right.
It's not actively on MLS.
Got
or
it.
any other.
It's a private sale.
All right. Okie doke. Got it.
I don't know.
Okay.
Okay,
We're
we
not going to
don't know.
debate. Neither of you are going to debate. We've got all the facts for the council to make their decision. Mr. Glasheen, you're recognized.
All right, I can tell you that Mr. Shapiro told me last week that he thinks he's got a buyer for it. And
Unsolicited offer,
yeah, and that it's gonna likely be sold. But
maybe.
I think that's not the most important consideration in my mind. I think that Council Member Brooke Brown did an excellent job of, studying the issues with the building permits, putting together a lot of research and the timeline, and is technically correct about, I would say, I don't have anything real substantively that I disagree with about what her position is on technically what's happened, except for one thing I would disagree with. You made the statement towards the end of your presentation, you said the city did everything right. And I strongly disagree with that statement. What the city did was, the city was operating under our former building official under the impression that P&Z could give setback variances, and was telling building permit applicants that P&Z could give setback variances. And then P&Z, I watched the P&Z meeting where they approved the Rollison setback variance, and the building official told P&Z that they could give setback variances. And the city's attorney was sitting there and was asked, and not Mr. Zach, but one of his partners was sitting there. Okay, an associate who was sitting there and was asked by members of the P&Z, can we approve setback variances? And she didn't answer the question and instead said, well, if you don't want to call it a variance, call it I think she said an exception.
A waiver.
A waiver is what she said. Thank you.
Was a waiver.
A waiver, which was terrible advice and was improper guidance from not to pick on Mr. Zach, but when we say, one thing I like about Mr. Zach is that if he makes a mistake or says something wrong, he says, hey, I was wrong, sorry. So, because I'm a lawyer, you're a lawyer, lawyers make mistakes too. And we just have to own them. But when we say the city did everything right, I'm saying the city did not do everything right. And then the city, I think, compounded the error by issuing, I understand exactly why Mayor Massengill recommended wrote a memo directing the officials to issue permits in August last year. Is understandable to me because it seems like it was the righteous or just thing to do given the previous actions by our building official and by P&Z and by even our city attorney at the time. And so given all those actions, I thought it was the right thing to do, but it was also not technically correct either. And so being not technically correct, it's something that had to be fixed and cleaned up also. Now, one of the issues where we also did wrong is, I understand that, you know, we've discussed this at length for many meetings, and Mayor Massengale has said, I spoke to Sarah Hudson, to Councilmember Hudson, and to Councilmember Brown about it at the time that I issued the memo, and Councilmember Hudson did recall that and acknowledge that she was aware of it back at the time. And so if, you know, you also said something about that this is the first time this has come to council's attention was, you know, I guess somewhat recently, and maybe we're talking about February, but that's not actually true. At least came to Councilmember Hudson's attention, and if the mayor is correct in his recollection, it came to your attention as well back in August of last year. And so for us to then come back 6 months later after issuing a building permit and say, okay, we're going to revoke that building permit because it was not technically correct in the manner in which it was issued and by the authority it was issued, and say you have to go back and get a waiver from Board of Adjustment on setbacks and then ask for another building permit, I'm not sure what we're trying to accomplish by doing that, because, you know, the homeowner, whether they've started construction or not, my understanding is there's been plans drawn for a house, and architecture isn't cheap, and that there's some money that's been spent in reliance on that. And I encouraged Mr. Shapiro to come and tell us that himself at council, at the council meeting, if they did in fact rely on that permit and spend some money on it. To me, it's not a question of whether it's technically legally correct or incorrect, other than that I think we all have to follow the law and best we can, and the way we follow the law in this case and still do it in the consistent with the interests of justice is to make this settlement agreement that would make the issuance of the building permit technically correct. But if we just stick to the technical aspects of the process and say, oh, you got to go back and do it all again, I don't think that's right. And to tell a homeowner we're going to revoke a permit, you know, maybe we could say that we're likely to win that kind of litigation, but I don't think it's right. And I wouldn't want to, you know, say that, you know, we told a homeowner that they got a variance and that they told them how to do it and that we issued it and then issued them a building permit, and then 6 months later we're revoking it. To me, that's not the right way to treat people. And I think that the mayor's actions that he took at the time were very well intentioned, and I think we should support the mayor's actions in that, not undermine his effort at this point in the process. You know, I think that we've all made it clear that that shouldn't ever happen again, and I think he knows that, and that we're going to stick to the technical process of things. And I think we've had turnover, you know, in building side. We have a whole new building official now. This is mistakes of past city officials, and to me, the thing to do now is to clean this up and fix it and move on. Because substantively, I don't see anybody objecting to this setback going from 30 to 20 feet. It is only 2 houses on the block, which does meet the exception.
No.
It's not? Well, there's only 2 houses there
No.
on Farley
But
Trail.
you have to have the rear abutting lot lines.
Okay. And you know, I appreciate that, and that's fine, because it's a weird 2-house street that dead ends into, I guess, Ms. Robinette's home, I think. But no? Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I get a little confused about that street, but it's an odd street to me. But in any case, I don't see it as being like it's not like building a 50-foot tall house to me. It's not, it doesn't create, I don't see it as a real big problem. But what I do see as a big problem is if, you know, we knew that this thing was being issued back in August and then don't say anything about it or complain about it until 6 months later and then try to revoke a permit. To me, that's wrong. So that's my view of it.
Thank you, Mr. Glasheen. I'm not gonna. Does any council member have additional comments or questions of Mr. Smith? Okay. Happy to take a motion, not take a motion.
I'd move that we authorize the city to enter into the settlement agreement as drafted, as we did with the Rollison property.
You have a motion by Mr. Glasheen. Is there a second? You have a motion by Mr. Glasheen. Is there a second? Okay, there being no second, then we will take no action at this time.
So I have a question. Are we intend as a council to leave this building permit in legal limbo, or do we consider it revoked? Are we intending to send a notice of revocation of the permit to the homeowner? Is that what y'all are proposing we do? Ms. Brown?
I have no further action to offer at this time.
You just want to leave it in legal limbo for the homeowner and have a cloud over their title and their building permit?
No cloud over the title.
Well, if they build a house that wasn't built with a properly issued building permit, it's subject to being demoed, and you can't get title insurance on that house. You can't get a mortgage on that house.
If you go back to, and I don't know if I want to do this, make this motion or not, but when I originally proposed this, I had on the proposed action to get advice of counsel on that question. And we have not, we as a council have not proceeded on that. And so I can't answer your question at this time.
I think council's made it clear that all we can do is revoke. Sure, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you were done.
We have a lot where there's been no construction started. Yes, Mr. Shapiro has spent money on architectural plans, but this can be fixed. That lot can be, and the permit can be brought into compliance. We don't have, any person that files a building permit application is charged with the responsibility of knowing what the code is. We don't have the situation where Mr. Shapiro was given wrong information by our building official. In the very first review of his permit, the building official said, this does not comply with the code. Ms. Rollison went to the Planning and Zoning Commission to seek approval of what she was told she needed, a plat variance. Mr. Shapiro did not take that step. And so he never had the reliance on action by the city that he would be granted a building permit. What happened in Mr. Shapiro's case was he was told in the very first and second and third zoning reviews that his building permit was not, his building application was not in compliance. And so if there is something like that, let's look at it and address it. But I've asked that from the very beginning, and no one's brought that forward. And so I'm acting on the basis of the information I have before me. If there was something else that we need to consider, let's pull it out and look at it and talk about it. But we can't embroider onto Mr. Shapiro's application the situation that Ms. Rollison faced. And that's all I have to say about that.
So if I may,
Yes, sir, Mr. Glasheen.
Mr. Shapiro was granted a building permit. He has a building permit. You said, you made a statement that permit can be brought into compliance. That is not a correct statement of the law. A permit cannot be brought into compliance. We can either revoke it or we can ratify it with this settlement agreement. And he can go through Board of Adjustment on setbacks and then make another application for a building permit, but he cannot bring a permit into compliance that he already has. And I just think it's just astonishing and appalling to me that people on this council would know that the mayor issued a building permit back in August of last year to Mr. Shapiro to solve a problem that the city created, and then not clean that problem up later when it, when there's when it turns out that the mayor technically may not have had the authority to do that. It was a well-intentioned effort to solve a problem, and it's something the city did. Council, some members at least were aware of it, and then to now say we're going to either revoke that permit or leave it in legal limbo are totally unacceptable solutions to me. I just think it's unfair. I think it's wrong. I think it's petty. I think it's hyper-technical. And I think it may even be political, and I think it's very ugly, honestly. That's my view of it. If anyone thinks that permit can be brought into compliance, I'd love to hear from council about that. But I think council has already told us very clearly that our choices are to either settle this matter and remove the question over that permit, or revoke it, or consider it revoked, or we can leave it in legal limbo if you want to, but that means that whatever structure is built could be ordered to be demolished at any time as being built without a valid building permit, as we saw in the 1957 City of Abilene case, where a homeowner's house was demolished for having an improperly issued building permit. So anyway, that's my view of it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Glasheen. Other
Council members wishing to comment?
any questions for Mr. Smith? Mr. Smith, do you want to correct the record on anything that's been heard this evening? Don't feel obligated, please. Just
My hang-up is
only okay. I wanted to give an opportunity, but okay. Mr. McDuffie.
So, watching Ms. Rollison's presentation in front of PNC, where the two properties create a block and they're back to back,
They're not back to back.
well, that was what was presented at PNC was
They're not back to back.
understood. But that was what was presented, and P&Z, given that information, and given the legal counsel at that time, gave it a green light. So to me, I viewed that, and that I see as a different situation. I didn't see that occur from Mr. Shapiro to Councilmember Brown's point. And that's where I'm hung up, in that at this time I'm not prepared to take clear action one way or the other, given that, because I don't have more information. So that's the distinction that's hanging me up there, is because there was a lot more given to the Rollison's situation. I do understand your point about the mayor trying to clarify and fix the situation, and that action being taken, and I understand that. And I do think there is some onus on the city to respect that. But I'm not sure if that tips the scale quite yet for me. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McDuffie. I think we've given ample opportunity for everyone, unless Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just listening to all
Don't
that.
feel obligated, but I just
No, I mean, it's,
I don't want anybody to feel like
I kind
I've
of want to clean this up too.
I've cut 'em
after
off.
Yeah.
Mr. Glasheen's comments.
All right.
I'm not interested in pulling permits from somebody. I'm just not.
The floor is still open. You can still make a motion or not, but I am wrapping it up here shortly.
I
so.
think I still have that motion, nobody seconded, so.
You still have a motion that no one seconded. You could restate the motion and see if you have.
Just that we enter the same settlement agreement with Mr. Shapiro that we did with Ms. Rollison. It's been drafted and authorized the city to enter into that agreement.
You have a motion by Mr. Glasheen.
Second.
You have a motion by Mr. Glasheen and a second by Mr. Robinson. I will reopen it for further discussion. Is there further discussion? All right, all those in, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We'll have to do a roll call vote. Ms. Brown,
No.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Glasheen,
Yes.
Mr. McDuffie,
Yes.
Ms. Hudson.
No.
Being 3 ayes, no nays, motion carries.
Oh, 3 ayes, 2 nays.
What did I say?
You said none.
None.
I'm sorry. It's been a very long day. Can't begin to tell you. There being 3 ayes, there being 2 nays, the motion does carry. Did you get that? Okay, council, unless there are other agenda items on this, I will entertain a motion gladly to adjourn, and it's still a relatively early hour. Is there a motion?
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion by Ms. Brown to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Being 5 ayes, no nays, you are adjourned. Thank you, council. Look forward to seeing you full-time and